By now you've heard about the shortage of baby formula wreaking havoc on the sanity of baby moms everywhere. Republicans have blamed Joe Biden, overzealous regulation, and illegal immigration.
The Biden administration has been sending pallets of baby formula for illegal mothers and their babies.
Democrats haven't exactly pushed back on the overzealous regulation narrative, with the White House this week promising they'd be cutting red tape to get more formula on store shelves. The real problem, as usual, is corporate power run amok. More than 80% of the baby formula consumed in America is produced by just 2 companies and just a handful of factories. It's a weird state of affairs for a century-old product made mostly of evaporated milk, especially when you consider the abundance of new milk options constantly vying for the latte loyalty of grown-ups. But many things have always been weird about the baby formula business. Abbott Labs' Similac and Mead Johnson's Enfamil have dominated the market for baby formula practically since it was invented. In the 1970s, a huge scandal over what activists correctly dubbed a corporate conspiracy to hook billions of innocent babies on liquefied junk food drove the third big player, Nestle, out of the business for decades. And in the 90s, the fourth big baby formula player, SMA, got out of formula manufacturing too. Soon enough, the price of a quart of the stuff surged to 10 and then 20 bucks. There's also one primary mega buyer of baby formula, the federal government. The USDA's Women, Infants, and Children Supplemental Nutrition Program, which distributes free formula to families under certain income thresholds, buys half of the formula consumed in America. That's another big driver of monopolization. It's a pretty reliable rule of thumb. The government business goes to those with the most entrenched lobbyists. Not coincidentally, the dominant formula maker, Abbott Labs, whose Similac brand controls 43% of the market, was also, until recently, the monopoly producer of rapid COVID tests. Abbott isn't your run-of-the-mill bread price-fixing monopolist. Last year, it joined the ranks of dividend kings, 39 members of the S&P 500 index that increased their payouts to shareholders for at least 50 consecutive years in a row. Abbott has paid shareholders nearly $10 billion in dividends since 2019, while dumping another $5.7 billion into stock buybacks. Staying in the lofty company of the dividend kings requires Abbott to send out bigger and bigger checks to investors with each passing year, which in turn requires them to generate bigger and bigger profits. That's not easy. Abbott's operating profit margins are 20%, more than twice as high as the average blue-chip S&P 500 stock. But as 2 recent stories that have emerged from Abbott's factory floors illustrate, maintaining those oligopolistic margins sometimes involves manipulating supply and demand in ways that can hurt both workers and consumers. Over the summer, the New York Times published a detailed account of Abbott ordering temp workers at a factory in Maine to destroy more than 8.6 million perfectly good COVID tests because cases were falling and they didn't want to risk an oversupply, driving price tags down. But just months before the pandemic at Abbott's main formula factory in Sturgis, Michigan, Abbott managers were so determined to meet their metrics that they refused to throw away at least one batch of formula in which multiple samples tested positive for potentially infectious microorganisms. That account comes from a 34-page whistleblower account mailed to the FDA in October that ultimately led to the February closure that touched off the formula apocalypse. It's not clear why it took so long for the FDA to investigate the report, which describes a toxic corporate culture that turned a blind eye towards serious breaches of the most basic regulatory requirements, and major and serious breakdown in the controls designed to ensure that the product met specification. But the report could almost be renamed How to Be a Dividend King, because for the most part these breakdowns occurred because following the rules would have cost money. There are accepted processes for testing the seams in the cans to make sure bad stuff stays out of baby bottles, but management games those tests by testing the cans before they're actually filled with powder. There are protocols for reporting the results of tests of formula samples for microorganisms, but the whistleblower noticed 9 reports that are straight up missing any test results at all, despite being signed off on by multiple supervisors. And when management detected micros in a batch of formula in 2019, they devised a BS workaround to the normal protocols so they didn't have to dump more than a small fraction of the batch, salvaging hundreds of potentially tainted cans of formula and fudging the book so FDA inspectors wouldn't catch on. They didn't. The source of the micros was old equipment that has needed repairing since maybe 2012, but the incentive structure doesn't permit such extravagances. The whistleblower discovered a pattern of supervisors blaming workers in official investigations of the root causes of quality control issues caused by known mechanical failures. This tracks with Abbott's apparent unwillingness, shared by so many modern monopolists, to invest in modernizing its plants. Like most S&P 500 companies, Abbott spent more on stock buybacks than capital expenditures last year. Over the weekend, an Abbott spokesperson had the gall to suggest that the company had been vindicated by CDC tests that had failed to find conclusive evidence linking the Chronobacter strains that had sickened 4 Similac-fed infants last fall and killed 2 to Chronobacter strains found in the Sturgis plant in February. It's not because inspectors didn't find Chronobacter at the site. They found 5 separate strains of it, just none that was an exact match to the strains believed to have infected the infants back in the fall. But this is not a malpractice trial. The infant deaths were certainly a factor in the agency's decision to temporarily shut down the plant, but inspectors' exposure to what the whistleblower repeatedly described as a total breakdown of quality assurance and record-keeping protocols was likely a more serious one. Both Abbott and the FDA have promised the Sturgis plant will reopen within weeks, but also that relief on store shelves is realistically 2 months away. While the formula apocalypse should have been a major boon for Similac's main competitor, Enfamil, the week before the FDA shut down the Similac plant, Enfamil's British parent company announced that it was putting the formula business up for sale because the formula racket had failed to produce the sales growth it anticipated. Women simply weren't having enough babies. I can't imagine why. And that's the thing about dividend kings and the spreadsheet wizards that engineer their stock market success. The idea of rising to a challenge, even if there's plenty of money in it for them, simply does not compute. All they know how to do is slash costs, jack up prices, and rain cash down on shareholders. The good news is that one of the most obvious solutions for the great formula apocalypse of 2022 would also go a long way toward solving a vast array of America's other problems, from understaffed emergency rooms to runaway inflation to airplanes inexplicably programmed to dive into the ground. Ban stock buybacks and restrict dividends on companies with a documented track record of flouting regulators and compromising safety standards. Because America has a lot of problems, and raining trillions of dollars down on shareholders for an umpteenth year in a row ain't gonna solve any of them.